Hi everyone, it's Kirstine from the Mustard Tree Trust. Hello everybody, it's lovely to see you again. I thought today we'd look at another of our saints. Do you remember we looked at St Oswald, who was the king, who brought his Christianity from Iona in Scotland here to Northumberland? And to do that he had the help of St Aidan, who came to teach all the men and women here about God, to build a church. He also built a hospital and he built a school. But now we're going to look at somebody else. We're going to look at a young shepherd boy called Cuthbert. So Cuthbert was born when Aidan was quite old. He lived with his aunt in the middle of Northumberland. He was very good at gymnastics, but he was a bit arrogant, a bit of a show-off, and a bit of a bully to people who weren't very good at gymnastics. The earliest story we have of this big boy Cuthbert was when he was about 6 or 7, and apparently he was showing off to all of his friends how good he was at gymnastics. And this little boy, who was about 3 at the time, ran up to him and said, "Stop being silly. God has got a plan for you, and one day you're going to teach everybody about God and Jesus, and you're going to be a priest." Well, that must have changed Cuthbert's view on things quite a lot. The next story we hear of Cuthbert was in AD 651. Now that date is a bit significant, but you'll find out in a minute. One night he was out on the hills with his sheep, and he looked over the sea over to Lindisfarne, and he saw this amazing vision. He could see these lights coming up off the island, up, up, up into the sky. Well, he didn't know what it was. But the next day, when he went back to his aunts and sitting around the table talking about things, they told him that St Aidan had died that very same time. And God told him, through working it out and talking with other people, that what he saw was St Aidan going up to heaven. How amazing was that? A little bit later, Cuthbert was down at Tynemouth. Now, if you've ever been to Tynemouth, you'll see there's this fantastic priory, monastery, up on the hillside. And when the monks built it, first of all, they brought these huge big trees down from further up the Tyne, and they floated them down on the river with their little boats beside them, and they just pushed these big logs right the way down the river. Well, one day when Cuthbert was there, he could see that the monks were getting into a bit of bother. They actually had floated the logs past the end of Tynemouth River and ended up in the sea, and they couldn't get back onto the land. The wind was blowing them and the tide was blowing them and pushing them out into the sea. Well, they were panicking, and there was a great big crowd of people standing around watching them. And you know what that crowd of people were doing? They were laughing. They were laughing at the silly monk. Well, Cuthbert got annoyed, and he ran up to them. He went, "What are you doing? Why are you laughing? We need to help these guys." And he got down on his knees and he prayed really, really hard for God to do something about it. "Please, God, help those people." And you know what? Something strange happened, because the wind changed direction. We've heard that bit before, weren't we? With St Aidan, when the wind changed direction. But the wind changed direction in this case and pushed the monks back on to the land. That's the second time we've heard of God doing that. He pushed all the monks and their little boats back onto the land, and you know, not one of them drowned or was hurt. They all survived. Another story about St Cuthbert was one day, when he was walking around to tell all the boys and girls and all the mums and dads in the villages all about God, he was walking with a small boy, and they had been walking for a very long time. And they were they'd already had their packed lunch, and it was getting to tea time, and they were kind of hungry. And the little boy had said to him, "Sir, what are we going to have for tea?" Maybe his stomach was rumbling. And Cuthbert said, "Don't worry, God will provide us with something." And the little boy was thinking, "There's nowhere very close. I can't see anywhere we can stay either." But as they turned the corner, they saw this amazing sight. There was a huge, big eagle sitting on the riverbank, and with it, it caught a massive fish. So Cuthbert said, "There you go. God has provided us with fish." And the little boy ran and he picked up the huge, big fish and he brought it back to Cuthbert. And Cuthbert said, "Whoa, not so fast." And he cut the fish in half and gave half of it back to the eagle. "Well, we'll eat well tonight," the little boy thought. And they did. And so did the eagle. Now then, I've got something quite special here. This is my otter. Can you see? One of my friends gave it to me. It's very, very lovely. It's very, very soft. But the reason she gave it to me is because of the next story. You see, Cuthbert lived on Farne Islands with lots of monks, but he actually really enjoyed some time on his own. And in the evening, when all the other monks were getting ready to sort of sit down after they'd had their meal, maybe they were playing games or telling stories, and Cuthbert would disappear. Now one night, one of the monks followed him, and he sat at the side of the beach and he watched Cuthbert. And Cuthbert waded out into the sea, right the way up to his shoulders. It must have been freezing cold, can you imagine? And when he got to his shoulder height, he then put his hands in the air like that, like a funnel shape. And that's how he prayed, talking up to God and waiting for God to talk back to him. They stayed there all night, and when he got out, I can just imagine him coming out to the side, shivering a bit, picking up his monk's clothes. Maybe he used one to do his hair a bit. And then he put his garment on. And then the monk that was watching him said something amazing happened, because 2 sea otters came out of the sea and sat around his feet. And they warmed it with his fur and breathed on it with their hot breath to warm and dry his feet. Wow. When I've told this story before, I've used the thing, "There's nothing hotter than an otter." After a little while, Cuthbert realised that he needed some time away from all the other people. And so he decided to go and live on the Inner Farne, which is a smaller island just off the Farne Islands. He took all his stuff across and he built a little shelter, but then he realised there was no water there. So him and his friends dug. And they dug. And they dug some more. And in the end, they had a big hole, but still no water. So they got down on their knees and they prayed. And they prayed. And they prayed some more. And then, at the bottom of the hole, they could see water. And that meant that Cuthbert could live there for most of the time and just go across to Lindisfarne and back to the mainland when he needed to. So that water apparently is still there, although you can't get on Inner Farne now, so we can't quite check it out. And one of the other things we need to tell you about Cuthbert is his love of God's word. He believed that God's word taught him how to pray to God and how to behave. And he thought it also taught him how God would reply to him and God would answer him. And he realised that the Bible was really special. And so he got monks together and created the scriptorium. Cuthbert made the monks write out from the big parchments and copy God's word down, word for word. They weren't allowed to make any mistakes. If they made a mistake, they had to get rid of the whole page. And because God's word was so special, the monks then decorated them with beautiful pictures. They're now called the Lindisfarne Gospels. And if you Google it, you can see a picture of them. And a little while ago, they were in Durham. And I think they might be coming back soon. And that was so important to Cuthbert. He knew that he had to live by God's word. And the only other thing we need to make sure we remember about Cuthbert is that he loved the wildlife, particularly the ducks. And he worked out that there was lots of wildlife, lots of birds in particular, who lived on the Farne Islands, who came and nested there every year. And so he went to King Oswy and said, will you make it a law that nobody can go onto these islands and harm the birds? And so he did. And that was the beginning of all our conservation laws. That was the beginning of us protecting God's world. So there's lots of things to think about with Cuthbert. He was a bit of a show-off, but he was told at a very young age that he needed to stop being silly and look out for God. He prayed really hard, and God answered his prayer in many different ways. He loved nature, whether it was otters or ducks. And you know, sometimes the eider duck is known as the cuddy duck, the Cuthbert duck in Northumberland. But most importantly, he loved God's word and he believed in it. And he believed it told him that if he prayed to God, then God would answer him. And that's what Christians believe today too. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our little stories about Cuthbert. I think he was a great guy. We'll see you again soon. Bye for now.